Welcome back. My name is Yana the Heretic, and this is my channel, Electromagnetic Identity. And we are starting the period of Janus. This is the correct way to pronounce it, at least in the English language. And this is the last quarter within the quarter of initiation. And Janus is the Roman god of beginnings, endings, time portals, and transitions. And to start off this period, we are in gate 42, and gate 42 is called the gate of growth and increase. And we see this filtering during April 10th through the 15th, which is a very cardinal time. It is Aries, full force, blooming, ready to go, ready to attract opportunities, just bright and excited, and just walking into each door possible. And it can get really wild, and this is also the ending of our tax period. So this is us wrapping up all of the things, all of the energy spent, because money is energy, and within the giving and receiving process. So Janus is a very mysterious, alluring type of deity. It is something a lot of people don't really recognize in Roman culture, because it is something that really starts off an entire process. Before anyone did any type of ritual or entered in any type of contract or cycle, they would praise Janus, because it would attract blessings to this manifestation that they are willing into being. And this is about using our fuel in order to allow this blooming to happen in our lives. So as we see ourselves maturing through cyclical processes, we spend a lot of time within a certain period. At first you begin your time frame typically going everywhere with your family, with your either mom or dad or brothers and sisters, and you're super attached, and you're maturing through being a kid with other kids, and then you grow up and you go to high school, and then you graduate. So this is like all these stages of our life. These are the contracts we enter, or the relationships that have passed, the colleges that we have attended and mastered something in. And then you don't realize when it hits. It's like when high school ended, you're like, holy shit, what do I do? There's this pressure. There's a pressure here to stay with a process. And that's why it can be extremely difficult once you're done, because you're like, where the fuck do I go? What do I do now? I spent all this time disciplining myself for this particular purpose, and now I don't know where I'm gonna go. This can happen especially in your Saturn return, because you start to learn, in the beginning of your 30s, oh yeah, my 20s are crazy, I did all this stuff, or vice versa. I was super disciplined in my 20s, and now I want to have some fun. There's constant transference of energy in our lives, and typically we never stay on one even keel. We like to experience through life, and that is really what this is about. This is about entering cycles that are going to initiate us into the beings that we wish to be, And therefore, it's really important to have a plan, because if you're not cautious and you're not, you know, responding with your strategy, and you enter a cycle, it could be detrimental because, you know, you agreed to something and you didn't realize how serious it was, and maybe you didn't actually want to do that. So before you say yes, you know, just remain cautious and focused on, you know, well, like, I personally get extremely tethered to my job, you know, extremely tethered to putting my energy towards something in, you know, any type of business, whether it's independent or if it's an employee situation, you know. So you don't really notice how fast time can fly by when you have decided to work for somebody and you are just temporarily in that cycle, you know. And I have personally experienced this journey and many paths, being jack of all trades, because a lot of the cycles that I have entered have abruptly got cut short because mostly the environment wasn't suitable, and I entered an environment out of desperation, and it ended in desperation. That is how cycles work. That is how especially relationships work with people. Because if you look at, you know, oh, well, I'm entering this, but it's kind of for like some greedy reason, you know, oh, I just need a place to stay. Oh, I just need, you know, shelter and food, and, you know, oh, well, this person has money, you know, or you just kind of like don't always know what you're entering, or you enter it prematurely without knowing the person that you're with in totality. And then, you know, you get married and then you have children, and then like the cycle just never ends, and you're stuck in this boredom and this stagnancy, and you're like, how did this happen to my life? You know, where did my vitality go? Where did the sacral energy go? Where is my fuel, man? And that is why it is important to be cautious to not enter a cycle in desperation. You know, because you want to graduate, you know, you want to like have something to share. And obviously, like, we all go through our alchemical processes that, you know, we can share with other people and be like, hey, like, don't follow these steps, you know, because ultimately they always end in this particular way. Like, how many stories do we have of like single parents, you know, raising their kids and struggling, and like they're not even able to spend time with their children because they have to work so hard, and somebody else gets to have all that time. And then, you know, your child gets raised with certain conditioning that you didn't put on them. So, you know, certain things cannot be avoided, and some people will call it karma, and some people like myself will, you know, be like, hey, like, you can change that. You can change your karma. Just, you know, remain cautious. And for me personally, the challenges were, you know, like, I could have had a degree of some type. I could have had a legitimate certification, you know, I could have like reached the honeypot of a relationship, you know, and gotten to share myself with somebody in totality, you know, or felt comfortable enough in my environment to have really secure bonds. But that just wasn't it, you know. I just didn't have those things happen, and therefore I had to go through a lot of acceptance and a lot of surrender, and just being like, yes, like, these are things that I have to forgive about myself, and I have to move on, I have to move forward, and, you know, I have to start anew. So if you find yourself extremely bored and stagnant, like, this is where you need that spark. And ironically, the spark comes from gate 53. And I say it's ironic because it's in the root. You know, you would think it would be more so in a different center, but, you know, the spark is really there. This is like, you know, the gate, the harmonic gate of beginnings and development that help the 42s spring into action after a cycle has ended, you know. So if you have this entire channel, it was in transit actually this entire 6 days of gate 42, and the channel of maturity is the design of a balanced developmental cycle. So it does bring a lot of caution to the strategic process. And it's quite difficult as a 42, as myself, to not have root definition, because it does add a lot more pressure into my field. It's that, you know, well, I'm just gonna like serve, you know. I'm a Virgo, and like I want to serve. I want to like see this through. It's really, really hard for me to simplify my life. You know, there's certain things that I've had for decades that, you know, I haven't finished, and I'm like beating it into myself that I must finish it because it means a lot to me, and I've already spent all this time working on it. So, you know, that is a pretty hefty pressure, you know. And it would have been nice if I, like, you know, got to nurture things a lot more to see that girth in like my expertise in certain ways, you know. I think it is different for other people that are manifesting generators, but, you know, just as an example, like, there could have been a lot more nurturing if I had stuck with something that, you know, would have been better. If I learned to nurture myself as much as I do others, I would have been able to stay within a cycle with healthy boundaries, with healthy, you know, with a healthy environment, and not just choosing something because like it's the only option. It's like, measure all of your options. Like, don't forget, you know, because your home and your time is so important. And we see like this happen with people that enter cycles, you know, with such a innocence, or, you know, with a lot of like heartfelt emotion, where they're like, well, I must support my family, so, you know, who cares if I hate this job, you know, so I'm just gonna like work till I drop, you know, for this thing. But then you realize like, oh shit, my boss is actually like this tyrannical dick, and, you know, is really sucking the life out of me every day. And, you know, the things that we're actually doing is like causing so much disarray in my environment. It is not one with nature. You know, perhaps it's like completely defiling nature, you know, or, you know, you don't really know exactly what you're doing. Like, you're spending all your energy, but the greater whole, the greater picture is never shown to you. So you don't know if you're like stepping over other people just to get ahead, you know. And this is like really what drives a lot of the culture here, especially in America. And it's caused a lot of pain and abandonment, self-abandonment, and hollowness, because we see like those people, those kids, you know, that have a dream, and like Justin Bieber, you know, like what he like went through a stroke, like, you know, all these celebrities that we have come to see their fall because they get famous so early, and then they're just like this target for such perversity in the world. And, you know, it just starts to defile them. It starts to make them feel like, wow, the world is actually way darker than I expected. You know, and you enter in these contracts, especially like these bands that have a record label, or these people that are entering a record label, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna be famous. And then, you know, like Sepultura doesn't even have rights to their music. And, you know, so many of these artists like really bled, you know, for their lyrics and their music, and they really like are the face of a song, and they don't even have rights to it. Like, these are the type of things that are extremely drastic that can happen if you enter a cycle without, you know, really thinking about the repercussions and really assessing, you know, what can happen. And, you know, it's more challenging in the sensing circuit. This is a part of the sensing circuit, so there is no spleen attached to it. This is like a straight shot. And, you know, there's emotions in it for sure, but it's just like your root, you know, up to your sacral, your identity, your throat, your ajna, and your emotions. And it's abstract. There is not really anything but that drive to want something new all of a sudden, you know, and really having instant gratification within a cycle can be pretty negative as well, you know. And I do think that happened for me for sure, because I don't have a root, you know, or ajna definition. It's undefined, not open, but, you know, it's causing me to like have this ADHD where, you know, I'm like, well, my head's bopping around of like which option to do, and I like really didn't have a strategy or any like way to grapple the reasoning. So yeah, like you just don't know like what's best, you know. You're just like, well, these are all these options, I want to do all of them. And then you're like, holy hell, like what am I doing? Like, where is this energy gonna come from, you know? So it's important to be real with yourself and real with other people, you know. And like there's a lot of being shy and not, you know, feeling like you're letting people down, and, you know, being scared of like telling people no and giving them full reasons why, you know. Sometimes it doesn't call for that. Sometimes, you know, you're not really tethered to something, and it's easy to say no. It should be easy to say no. So, you know, really assess how you would be hurting the economy, you know, extending class wars, hurting nature, you know, limiting self-respect, and getting manipulated, you know. That is not something that is fun, and it doesn't end that entire cycle. You know, people pay you scraps while they get wealthy off more of the dividend of your energy. And people that climb high ladders at a young age, they will be broke a lot of the time because they just spend out all their money, you know, their family's money. There's a lot of health issues and identity crisis that can happen too, entering a cycle that isn't authentic. And, you know, the brainwashing and abuse and like ranges of, you know, drug use and shame, and, you know, that can be like such a heavy burden to carry, especially if you can't even look at it. And yeah, just remember to do things bit by bit. You know, there is no rush to enter a cycle, because if you think about it, you know, you enter a wrong cycle, you're going to be ending up wasting your time anyway. So take extra time before you enter a cycle, because it'll greatly extend your community. If you think about it, you know, the people that really have nothing, you know, they start to challenge themselves bit by bit. And, you know, other people are like, yeah, like, we love your work, we love your art, you know, it could be better, but like, you know, we're still going to support you. And we see that you're struggling, or we see that you really like want to bake and like, you know, want to get your food out there, your cakes or whatever, you know, and, you know, people start to support you, and then you start rising, you start building, and like it has this community with you. And somebody will be like, hey, I remember when you first started that freaking business, and now look where you are. And it just like really gives you the sense of purpose, because you're also like including way more people in your process along the way. People that see your struggle can resonate, you know, and it feels so good to like rise in community, rise with friends, rise with, you know, people that really have seen you struggle and make it out with success and joy and happiness and, you know, purpose, the sense of real purpose. It makes you proud and enriches your life with joy and deep gratitude for those you love, those that you know, support you day in and day out. We did have Aries enter Mars on the 9th, and Aries entering Mercury on the 14th, just before the transit ends. For me personally, I did have a lot of opportunities coming into my field at that time. And some of them were actually just reminders of the choices and the choices I shouldn't make, really. Like, you know, like, there's this like glint in the ether of like, oh, do you remember this? Do you want to do this again? And like life is really not pulling me in that direction, and I've done a lot of acceptance around that, and it's like, oh, that was just a test, because we just want to make sure you know your methods are intact of how to really decide what's right for you. So I got a little bit of that, you know. My brother left for boot camp on the 9th, and, you know, instead of really grieving like forever about it, I engaged my willpower into making a biodynamic garden. That's the cycle that I entered, you know, and in using the challenges to build up the confidence, because, you know, it's about what you can do, you know, in times of struggle and challenge. It's like you have to really grab onto something that will make you feel confident, you know, and purposeful. And sometimes when you go through a lot of pain and struggle, and you're like, okay, like I gotta really think about, you know, what is gonna make me feel purpose, and just put your whole heart and soul into it. You know, your fuel is going to orbit around this focus. Your sacral is just going to power you up every single day towards that thing, rather than you like hating your life, you know, and not being happy every day. You know, that is a recipe for disaster. So praise Janus, and welcome to this quarter within a quarter. And I want to share the questions of the week. We do have the channel of community filtering a lot this year. And we have a channel of recognition. So recognizing, you know, your dreams. Recognizing what dreams, you know, are going to really pull you towards the end, you know, goal. And, you know, making sure that your desires can dissipate, you know, the ones that are not healthy. You know, that is also the difficult aspect of this, is if you have gate 30 like I do, your desires will pull you every single direction. I say it's okay because I'm on the cross of migration, so I'm meant to travel, I'm meant to be nomadic as a person. So what cycles have you entered, you know, this year that are new? Questions of the week. What cycles have you entered that are new to you, and how do you feel about them today? What patterns repeat in your life by the law of attraction? So are you leaking out of your aura? Are you, you know, is there a hole that is in your spirit, you know, that is just constantly leaking energy? What is that actually attracting, and how can you like start to fill up this hole, you know, and be holistic towards yourself, instead of just like giving all the nurturance to other people. When you repeat something that you are humiliated by, what stops you from seeing the clear picture? What happens after you're humiliated? Are you honest and just like, shit, I'm so sorry. Like, this is so dumb. Like, I acted totally dumb. And, you know, I put myself in the situation again and I really want to learn from it, you know? Or do you just wrap it all in? Do you just like tighten and become closed off and like not be able to say sorry, or not be able to really like open up and talk about the things that are deeply humiliating? What cycle has brought you the most revelations in life? What did your path towards maturity look like? Maturing through any part of your life, really. And how does your mind work abstractly when piecing things together? So which memory leads to another memory and another memory, and what does that collage look like? That is it for gate 42, the gate of growth and increase. This is increasing skills, increasing success, increasing talent. This is the gate of striving towards something bit by bit, with passion, with fuel, with ambition. And I am greatly wishing that upon you. Thank you for watching. I will see you next week.